Good evening, good evening, good evening, and good evening. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. This is our third night. Tomorrow will be the last night. And, I was talking to Paul Werksdorfer. He came up to me and said, as he's going on this virtual tour, he's going through virtual jet lag, which I thought, okay. So I hope the jet lag isn't too hard. I think you're getting through it right now. But just want to mention real quickly before we get into it that the table in the foyer has Ronnie's books. He doesn't have them with him, but you can order them there. Just make a check or make it out to Calvary, Spokane, and that's spelled Kenor. No, but just want to remind you that those are available. And one of the things that we're going to be working on, even though this is being live streamed, we're going to basically edit out the series and then archive it on our website. And so if you are interested in other teachings that Ronnie's done with us over the years, I think we've got quite a lengthy series of messages that he's given about different aspects about the Middle East, about Israel, and many of the things we're talking about. You can go to our website on our sermon archives, and there's a whole section there with Ronnie's messages. I think there's probably like 20 of them or something like that. So for those of you who just find that you're not getting enough of Ronnie in this series, you can go there and tap into it and get even a broader and more extensive exposure to many of the things that he's been sharing about. But let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll have Ronnie come up here and take at it. Lord God, we thank you that we have this opportunity to gather together. It's always an honor, always a blessing, always a source of joy as we celebrate the truths of your word, Lord, and just learning about the land of Israel. Bless Ronnie, and bless him in his teaching, and bless our hearing, that we might receive everything that comes to help us build up our most holy faith. We ask these things of you, Father, in Jesus' name, amen. Ronnie, why don't you come on up?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming back. It's such a cold night and cold evening. It snows in Jerusalem as well, so we're not used to that. It's always fun to have snow, especially in Jerusalem. Those of you that were here the last couple of nights, and those of you that still have virtual jet lag, I like this one, we covered quite a lot so far. I'm sure that you've noticed that. Able to cover 4 days. We are halfway through the tour and halfway through this seminar. And as I mentioned yesterday, part of the plan is just to give you enough information to prepare for Jerusalem. Because everything that we touched on so far is somehow connected to the heart of the country, the heart of the nation, which is the city of Jerusalem. We'll dedicate 3 full days to speak about Jerusalem. But then number 5 that we are going to start with this evening will take us down to a very unique area, unique geologically, unique historically, unique from so many different aspects, and that will be the area of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is special because of many reasons, and one will be, we don't call it a Dead Sea, we don't even like the term. In Hebrew, the name that we are using is a salt sea. Because if you call something dead, it shows some approach that you may have to a certain location. The Dead Sea is not dead. The Dead Sea is a source of life to so many people, always had been the case. So the question is, who would call such a place a Dead Sea? In most cases, people that were foreigners in the country, they never tried to figure out to explore the riches of this area. All they knew was it's very hot down there. There's a very unpleasant smell of sulfur, especially in the afternoon, and nothing lives in the water. Basically, one historian, a crusader, called it the entrance to hell. Well, we don't like the term Dead Sea because it was a source of life. It is a source of life today through some major industries. We prefer to call it the Salt Sea. In the scriptures, in Jewish sources, you will not find the term Dead Sea. So the Dead Sea is very interesting, and many things happen on the shores of the lake, some of which are connected to our history, to our heritage. It is an opinion I'm sharing with you, my opinion, that anybody who wants to fully understand the land of Israel, the state of Israel, the Jewish people, and how we are connected to our country must visit and fully understand the message behind 3 key locations. Masada is number 1. That's where we are going to start today. because Masada will be a symbol that represents the national sentiments of the Jewish people, and to live as a free nation, there's only one such location, that will be the land of Israel. When you go to see the Western Wall, you cover the religious part of the Jewish faith, and when you go to see the Holocaust Museum, you do have the reason why there must be a Jewish homeland. Interesting, we'll speak about the Holocaust Museum tomorrow, and tomorrow is the International Memorial Day for the Holocaust as well, January 27th. It's a day that was kind of ordained by the United Nations about 10 years ago, so the world is going to commemorate that in ceremonies, in parliaments and places around the world. So we'll speak about it tomorrow as well, visiting the Holocaust Museum. So out of the three, today we're going to speak about the national symbolic side. And the question is, why would the nation choose a place that has a story like Masada? What will be the symbol behind that? You have the Alamo, and different nations have different sites, and we have Masada that was carefully chosen to deliver a certain message, and this will be part of the story. Here is the map, and you do know how we begin usually. Show you the route that we are going to take, as if we are coming from Jerusalem. That's how it was planned, and we're going to take a short ride along the Jericho Road. And yesterday we climbed up to Jerusalem. Today we're going to go down the Jericho Road. And if you go to Luke chapter 10, when Jesus gives the parable of the Good Samaritan, it starts by saying a man was walking down the Jericho Road. Indeed, it's walking down the Jericho Road. So when you leave Jerusalem and you start heading east, you are going through the Judean desert, the Judean wilderness, a very unique desert, a place of refuge to rebels, a place of refuge to people that were wanted by the authorities, and maybe David, before made king, who is the most famous one that roamed the mountains and valleys of the Judean desert and had an encounter with King Saul in a place called Ein Gedi that we are going to visit after visiting Masada. And then on our way back, we are going to stop at Qumran. That's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And we'll try to make a connection between the scrolls and the site, if there is such a connection. And just to speak a little bit about the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we end the day with some real fun floating in the Salt Sea. And this is an experience second to none. Some of you have been there. You know what I'm talking about. I won't give you the whole list of do's and don'ts as you go inside because it's virtual. But it's always a fun experience when you end a long day, you're tired, and you just go to float in the Salt Sea. That will be the plan, and let's say a word or two about the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. All this animation, I'm apologizing. Sometimes I just enjoy doing all of that. But you do see some pictures from the lake. It's a lake, not a sea. And you see the body of water in front of you. About 1,350 feet below sea level. That was 10 years ago. It's dropping and falling every year, 3 or 4 feet. So today it's about 1,450. It's about 50 miles long, about 12, 13 miles wide. Very deep lake as well, and has about 38 to 40% of salt in it. You do understand that nothing can live in such salty water, maybe some bacteria, but this is something that they did not know back at the time. On the other hand, it was a place of industry because that's where salt was mined from the lake. In the southern part of the sea, the salt is so thick that you can simply cut yourself a block of salt and you carry it with you. It was as good as money, the only known preservative at the time. Every offering in the temple, you have to offer with salt. It was a very precious commodity. So it was a place of rich industry and a moneymaker. Why call such a place a Dead Sea? We do have a couple of oases also on the shores like Ein Gedi and some of the others. It was rich farmland as well. So the Dead Sea was always connected to industry and to the salt mining, including some other minerals today. It's one of the largest industries in Israel today. We are mining 3 million tons of minerals from the Dead Sea. Potash and bromine and sulfur and phosphor, magnesium, etc. So today it's indeed a real natural treasure, and it was to some extent a natural treasure back at the time as well. One of the questions about the Dead Sea always connected to the location is the question, what about Sodom and Gomorrah? Do we know the location of Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, the simple answer is no, we don't. A more complicated one is maybe. But there are teams of archaeologists who are looking for these two cities for decades now. And as we speak, 4 teams, 2 American universities, and 1 from Italy, 1 from Britain, are excavating sites around the Dead Sea, claiming that they found ancient Sodom. How can you make such a proclamation? I'm not sure, unless you find something that says, this is Sodom, I guess you'll never know. But while we are confused, how come we cannot point at a certain location? Because sometimes the Bible doesn't give us enough geographical data, And the Bible is pointing at two different possible locations. You go to Genesis 13, the Bible speaks about Abraham and Lot, and they stand on the mountains of Judea between two places, Ai and Bethel, which are here. And these two were located beyond any doubt. And then they decide to separate. And Lot looks down to the plains, and he sees a lush, beautiful area, and he chooses to go down to the plains, and he settles in Sodom. Well, the only lush area you can see if you're standing here on the mountains is the big oasis of Jericho, which is down below you. So based on Genesis 13, we have to look for Sodom and Gomorrah someplace on the northern shores of the Dead Sea, as you understand from Genesis 13. 6 chapters later, Genesis 19, we are told that Abraham was heading down south to Hebron, and he pitched his tent outside Hebron, and from that location, he saw down below him the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, Hebron is someplace over there. And from that location, you cannot even see the area of Jericho. You can see the southern part of the lake, so maybe someplace down there, Sodom and Gomorrah were, as we can understand from Genesis 19. So go figure, one or the other. But Genesis 14 may be the answer to the question, because after Abraham rescued his nephew Lot, and yesterday we went with him all the way to the gates of Dan, some of you may recall, on the way back to the mountains, and there's only one place to go up to the mountains, the Jericho Road, Abraham is welcomed by Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and the king of Sodom. Now, if Sodom was down south, why would the king of Sodom even bother to take a long journey just to greet Abraham on his way back to the mountains? Unless Abraham was going through Sodom's territory. So we have better reasons to believe that Sodom was located someplace on the northern side, although most everybody is looking for the ruins of town further down south. One of the mysteries, we don't have a final answer, either one or the other. Well, let's start our tour, and let's start visiting the sites, and we begin with Masada. Masada means a fortress, and it's an amazing place to visit. And sometimes as we're getting closer with the bus to Masada, we are way down below on the road, and people look at the mighty cliff, and I tell them, listen, it's hard to understand, it won't register quickly, but the very top of Masada is 45 feet above sea level. Now people forget that they are 1,400 feet below sea level. So well, how can that be? So quite amazing, this relativity of how deep you are, and this mighty cliff, the very top of it, is barely above sea level. But look at the shape of it. You do see the cliffs to 4 directions. It's impossible almost to access the top. And if you are located on the top, protecting such a place should be quite easy. If you have enough water, if you have enough food, just the structure and just the topography will give you a lot of defense, and that was indeed one of the places that were chosen to be a fortress, and the builder, as always in this era, was King Herod the Great. So we speak about the Roman era once again. We speak about the reign of Herod. You can tell how influential that individual was. We mention him so often that historians call the whole era the Herodian era. So he left a mark behind the country, as we saw in other places as well. When you speak about Masada, you speak about the Jewish-Roman wars. We speak about an episode in Jewish history that was a catastrophe. Well, now we know they did not know back then. And the problem was that a nation that lived under Rome's occupation decided to go to war against the mightiest empire, and the question has to be, who are the people that thought this is a good idea, or it's doable? It's one thing to say we really need to be free and we want to be independent politically, not just spiritually. It's another thing to prove it's doable. And therefore, to lead the whole nation to come to the decision that we are going to risk everything, including the temple, and we are going to go to war against the Romans, somebody had to be behind the idea and slowly convincing all the others that this is the only option. Because we have to say it loud and clear, Rome never oppressed anybody religiously. The Romans couldn't care less about what the Jews are practicing. Be loyal to Rome, pay your taxes. We respect the God of Israel as well. And as long as that was the case, there was no motivation to people to go to war, because the one reason that will stir up the Jewish people to get together with all the division and diversity and go to war is the temple is not safe. So we speak about unusual times in Jewish history that the whole nation is going to get together, and there was no consensus. instigated by a small group of zealots, that was the name of these people, to go to war against the Romans. And somehow Masada will be the symbol of all of that, because that's where the war, in a way, started, and that's where the war ended. And the question should be, why choosing Masada to be a symbol? I'll try to answer the question. Just to touch on some things over there, just to kind of to set the scene and to try to explain. We have an excellent source who tells us the story, and this is Josephus Flavius. Unfortunately, and he's quick to admit, he was not in Judea when Masada was conquered by the Romans. So he gives us an account that he did not see with his very eyes, but he says that when Masada was conquered and the Jews took their own lives, it was not committing suicide, very important, I'll explain later on. 2 women and 5 children survived. And they were brought to Rome as prisoners of war, and Josephus happened to meet them, and he heard the story. So we have a Jewish source to tell the story, because the Roman sources are silent. Masada may be a major issue for us, but you speak about the Roman affairs, just a minor problem, a minor fortress, some down in the desert. We don't even pay attention to that. Our historians don't even mention that because it wasn't important. But for the Jewish side of the story, Masada plays an important role in understanding our national character, I believe. So we need to understand who was the source and who tells the story. And we need to understand how the tension in Judea is mounting to lead to a war. After the death of Herod, his 3 sons are replacing him. One of his sons is called Herod Archelaus. I mentioned him yesterday. He's appointed to be the king of Judea, Samaria for 10 years at 6 AD. Since the people are complaining that he's overcharging taxes, the Romans decide to dismiss him. He's exiled to go to France, and Judea is proclaimed a province. You go to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, in the days of Caesar Augustus, when Quirinius was the governor of Syria, he ordered the world to register. Joseph took Mary and went back home to Bethlehem. So we know the exact event, we know the year. Judea is now a province, and Judea is governed now by Roman governors. Now these guys couldn't care less about the significance of the temple for the Jews. It was not reflecting Rome's policy, but the Roman governor will have a very unique mindset. I'm going to Judea, I'm going to hate my position over there because the Jews are troublemakers. They do not respect the Roman culture. I cannot have beautiful parties with the gods and images. At least I can come back home richer than I went. Richer means that I'm going to do whatever I can to provoke the Jews, so they will respond by rioting, and while suppressing the riots, I can simply rob the temple and the rich villas of the Jewish aristocracy. So if you're going after the temple because your motivation is finances, Rome no longer respects the temple. And that begins to change a mindset among the people. That was the only reason to get together to go to war. So things are getting worse. And one governor is worse than the other. And the mindset begins to shift that the only option to protect the temple is indeed to go to war. And that's what will lead later on to this big explosion, so to speak, that led to the catastrophe of losing the temple, losing the country, and 2,000 years of exile that we did not recover from yet, because even today, most of the Jewish people do not live in Israel. The biggest Jewish city in the world is Brooklyn, yeah, exactly, not Jerusalem. And therefore, we're in the process of recovering, but we are not there yet 2,000 years later. So we need to understand the motivation, and we need to understand that Masada will be the focal point of all of the above. Here is a little kind of a 360 to show you how the mountaintop looks like, and this is all the excavations of 1962 to 1965. They found living quarters, they found palaces, they found the wall of Masada, which is quite amazing, and they found a lot of things to indicate a palace, a fortress built Roman style, plaster on the walls, beautiful frescoes and mosaics. If you speak about Herod that wanted to impress the Romans, that's the standard that you're going to expect. 14 storerooms. The place was so well prepared and equipped for war that no wonder why the Zealots chose this place to be the first target to start and launch the war against the Roman army. So as we are going to tour Masada later on, we are going to stop at some places and while we are telling the story. 360 is almost over. It is now. Okay.
Hot time shalot.
We are standing on top of Masada, very close to the shores of the Dead Sea. This is the national site for the State of Israel today, and the State of Israel today is connected to the story and the message that we would like to deliver. But historically, the story goes back about 2,000 years in time. The days of King Herod the Great, the mighty ruler that was a proxy of the Roman Empire and built 7 fortresses in the desert. The reason for constructing those were places of refuge. Herod was not secured in his own capital in Jerusalem, and just for a rainy day, he had to have some places of refuge, and since everything was done Roman style to impress Rome, Masada was built as a palace, as a fortress that was definitely Roman style. We don't even know if he ever visited the place, but he was the man behind the project. Why right here? A couple of ideas. Number one, there is a land bridge that crosses the Dead Sea to the other side. And back in the days of Herod, the client king of Rome, that was the line between 2 mighty empires. It was Persian territory on the other side, and since the lake is down below, there was no way to cross from the other side unless you take the land bridge. So if indeed these were the sizes of the Dead Sea 2,000 years ago, that will explain why this mountaintop and not anybody else in any other mountaintop in the area. Masada literally means a fortress, and indeed the place was built as a fortress and as a palace. When you tell the story of Masada, you can divide it to 5 minor stories. Number one, what you see around you. Everything was built in the days of King Herod the Great, the walls, the bathhouses, the palaces. But Masada is known predominantly for the story of the Zealots, and that will take us 100 years later. Scholars do believe the place was erected around 25 BCE, but the main story will take us to 66 AD, and that will be the first year of the Jewish war against Rome. If you knew anything about the Jewish society back then, and you had the chance to chat with Jews who lived in the country, to ask them a question, "Sir, ma'am, are you content with Rome's occupation?" That may be a stupid question to ask, but the answers will be important. If you approach a man that came from the majority of the Jewish society, a man called a Pharisee, his answer will be, "I only care about one thing, and that will be worshiping the God of Israel." As long as the Roman Empire respected the temple in Jerusalem, for most of the people, they could easily endure any kind of oppression because you pay taxes to somebody anyhow. And therefore, if you were a Pharisee, which means the majority, your answer to the question will be, we serve a king who is not flesh and blood. We understand that we need to pay our taxes. But as long as Rome respects the temple, there's no motivation to go to war. If you checked with the Jewish aristocracy, the Sadducees, they would have told you, we'll live like Romans. We have our positions given to us by Rome. There's no reason to go to war either. So the question is, who were the people that led the whole nation to this war against Rome? Well, they were the Zealots. We speak about Galileans, and the only group in the Jewish society that had a national agenda and not just a religious one. So the question that you would ask a Zealot, are you content with Rome's occupation? The answer will be, we hate the Romans. We want to be independent, not just spiritually, but also nationally. And what we need to seek as a nation is to have a king from the line of David. Well, to carry on with the story, that would be the motivation to show you the land bridge. You do see that there is a land bridge indeed down this way. And once again, keep in mind, the Jordan Valley, the Dead Sea, that was the line between 2 empires. This is Persian territory, which means that such a land bridge could serve as an invasion route for the Persians, and you want to protect that by placing your fortress right above that. Protecting doesn't mean that you can stop somebody by firing because it's too far away. But you can see if somebody's coming, you can send message to headquarters in Jerusalem, you buy some time to prepare, and for that reason, that mountaintop was selected in order to guard that area. So you want to build a fortress in the desert, and you do understand the challenges. What about water? What about food? What about building material? Well, let's answer the questions.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, this is the director. So, you want to build a fortress in the desert. You do understand the challenges. There's nothing around here. You need to bring the materials. You need to survive in the desert. What will be the choices or the options? Keep in mind, we speak about the Romans, and this is a civilization that no challenge was too big, especially for King Herod the Great, that his whole reign was to prove himself as worthy for the Romans. Number one, you have to solve the water problem. It looks like there's no water in the area, but about 15 miles away from here in the mountains of Hebron, about 20 inches of rainfall every year. If you know how to collect the water and channel it into one central canal, you can fill up water systems. And indeed, 8 such systems were built. 6 on the western cliff, 1 on the very top that had to be filled with water all the time, and 1 on the eastern side. True, except for 1, the others were outside the walls, and for that reason, accessible by potential enemies. And for that reason, you had to make sure that whatever is the situation, the cistern on top had to be filled with water because you may be cut off from the others. The Romans knew about siphon, they knew about water pressure, and therefore collecting rainwater from the mountains of Hebron, that will be solving the problem. When all the cisterns were filled with water, the capacity was 40,000 cubic meters. That's more than enough, either for the small garrison that was stationed on top or for the 960 Jewish zealots, men, women, children. So water was not really an issue. What about food? Well, nothing grows in the area. However, Josephus Flavius, the famous historian, tells us that there was a market garden on top of Masada. There was a big depression over that direction that no structures were found. We do know it was filled with good soil, and the king, if he really wanted to, you can have fresh vegetables on your breakfast table. So we do speak about Roman ingenuity or Herod's ingenuity that made this place a beautiful and lavish garden in the desert. What about building material? Well, right behind us will be the quarry. It's all made of limestone, a tough limestone called dolomite, a very good building material. So at least stones did not have to carry it from far away, but they did the plaster because everything was beautifully plastered and painted with frescoes. So when you make such a decision that you want to build a place, such a remote area, you better have the skills to carry out such a project. Well, look at that, water in the desert. Now it's hard to believe. These flash floods are coming through the mountains 2, 3, 4 times a year. This is only one such canyon out of 25 to 30. I lived there, that was a few years ago, and a group from this church was with me on top of Masada, and you actually saw those ravines carrying water. Waterfalls on the cliffs, absolutely amazing. So that's the amount of water. Double that or triple that a couple of times every year, and you know how to catch the water on the hills and channel it to cisterns, you solve the problem. And that's what they did in Masada, and that's what they did in other places. Without doing that, living in the desert will be impossible. In years to come, Christian monks erected 100 monasteries in the desert in the 5th century, 6th century, using the same idea. We're going to catch rainwater, we're going to divert it to fill up cisterns. That's how you make life in the desert possible, and that's how Masada basically survived, by using that technology. The war started at 66 AD, and most of it happened in other parts of the country. And after Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, technically, it came to an end. But Masada still survived. Masada survived as a hub for the zealots. And after Galilee was conquered by the Roman army, many of those zealots fled from Galilee to the only place that was in their brothers' hands, Masada. It became to be a small community, and Josephus tells us 960 men, women, children took shelter on top of that mountaintop. They were definitely shocked when they heard about the destruction of Jerusalem, and they were waiting to see what will be the outcomes of the war, because in Masada, nothing happened yet. The war took place in Galilee, in Judea, around Jerusalem. Masada was not under any threat until the Romans decided to come and to conquer the place as well. The war started at 66 AD, and the trigger was an incident in Caesarea, far away from here. But it looks like the first act of war is connected to Masada. A group of zealots came from Galilee and occupied the place. How was it taken, we do not know, because Josephus Flavius doesn't provide any details. The place was occupied by a small garrison. Maybe they tricked him somehow. But when the place was conquered, there was a reason why to start here. Everything that was in the storehouses, including 10,000 body armors, were taken to Jerusalem and were lost during the war. So the war takes place in other parts of the country, and there was no impact on Masada, except for one thing. Since now the place is occupied by the zealots, some of the Galilean families came to join them. And Josephus speaks about 960 men, women, children that actually come to live in Masada. This will be now living quarters for them, and that will be the peak of the drama in few years to come. The war came to an end officially with the conquest of Jerusalem, and after the temple was destroyed, the city was set on fire, yet 2.5 years passed before the Roman army decided to try to conquer Masada as well, and we do not have the reasons why. Number one, why wait for such a long time? Or number two, why come? Masada was not presenting any challenge to the Roman Empire. You cannot even say that maybe the Persian invasion was something that they could consider, because the Persians did not come to assist the Jews during the war, so now when everything was gone, basically, why come now? Well, the only thing that we can actually speculate about is it was an opportunity for the Romans to teach a lesson. The 10th Legion was deployed in Jerusalem, Fretensis was the nickname, and Gaius Silva, the commander, led them down into the desert at the end of 72 AD. And the idea was to teach the Jews a lesson. We're going to uproot that rebellious spirit from amongst you, and we won't stop until we accomplish our goal. So you can go down to the desert. You can try to hide in high places. We will not spare any efforts to do that. And indeed, the Roman army is bringing 20,000 people down this way. And when they come to the area, and Silva is mounted on his horse and rides around the mountaintop, he understands one thing really quickly. To conquer the place will be almost impossible. Other option was to lay siege around it. But he also knew that the place is so well equipped with food and water that such a siege will take a long time. And therefore the only way was somehow to build war machines, somehow to bring them up to Masada, break through the walls and conquer the place. And the Romans started working. They built 8 camps, and one of them you can see behind me around the mountaintop, and they built a ramp as well. And when the Roman army was ready, they built a big war machine, looked like a big tower, and they pushed it up against the ramp to bridge the walls. Now think about the Logos for a minute. What could they do to stop the Romans? Not much. Everything of value was taken to Jerusalem when the war started. All they could do is to see the Romans making their preparations and wait for the right moment for the Roman assault. Well, here's a picture of the Roman ramp, and this is all man-made. This whole hillside was built by the Roman soldiers. And we have all kind of documents and stories that were using Jewish slaves to be like human shields and work behind those slaves as they build the ramp. This is all man-made, quite amazing to see. It was built in about 4 months or so. I'm not supposed to take the Roman side here, obviously. I'm just explaining the whole procedure. We'll speak about the zealots in just a minute. But you do understand the level of planning, the level of organization. So the ramp is ready. The big war machine, which was like a mobile tower, is also ready. And it's about a time to make a decision for the zealots up on top of Masada. Because it's only a matter of time, hours now, the Roman army is coming. You do understand that when it's quiet in the desert, voices will travel easy to a long distance. And of course, there was some kind of an interaction. People yelled at each other. People blessed each other. So you could hear what was going on. That was also kind of a psychological warfare. We are coming to get you. No, you won't. You can easily build up the whole story. But the zealots understood that the time is short and something has to be done. And for that reason, the commander of Masada, a man by the name of El-Azar, son of Yair, a zealot, who fled from Jerusalem just before the city fell to the Romans, is getting the men to the synagogue of Masada to make a decision. The question on the table was, what are we going to do? The Roman army is coming. We only have few men. It will be impossible to find the Romans. What are the options? And that night was the drama that took place in the synagogue. And let's try it. I hope that the audio is good enough to understand that as well. I'm sorry. I'm 3 times sorry. Okay. We are seated now, literally, in the wall of Masada. It's impossible to see, but behind this wall over there is an abyss of nearly about 1,000 feet that drops down to the foot of the fortress. And we are seated now on stairs, seats, that were not officially designed by King Herod the Great, but by the Zealots. When the Zealots came to occupy Masada, they did not come to enjoy the beauty of the Roman palace. They came for a purpose, and they needed some facilities that the palace did not have. If you live in a Jewish community, you have to have a cleansing facility, so they built some, and you have to have a place of gathering, that would be a synagogue. As long as the temple was still standing, this was not a place of worship, that was a place of gathering, that was a place of teaching, education. And obviously, when the story of Masada is about to come to an end, decision had to be made by the locals because the Roman army was ready with their seer system. It's only a matter of days before the Roman army is going to breach the walls and occupy the place. The big question was, what are we going to do? Josephus Flavius was not here for that occasion, But he tells us that 2 women and 5 children survived, and they were brought to Rome by the Romans, and he heard the story from them. And he basically tells us that Eleazar, son of Yair, the commander of Masada, gathered all the men to the synagogue and presented a simple question: what are we going to do? And you do understand the mindset of people. The Roman army is about to breach the walls. We speak about families, men, women, children. What were the options? But you also have to keep in mind, we speak about zealots, and zealots came from a certain part of the Jewish society that really worshipped, if you wish, not just the God of Israel, but political freedom. And therefore, knowing that the Romans are too powerful, and knowing that stopping them, engaging them in battle would be almost impossible, it left one option only: to die as free people, and that was to take their own lives. So think about the drama. Think about the mindset of the people, knowing that the hours are short, and the time is short, and they're seated right here to make that big decision. And then Josephus tells us the men went back home to kill the family. It's a horrible story, not an easy one to tell. The mothers first, so they will not witness the death of the children. And then the men got together here, and they had to cast lots that we saw earlier. And that's how the last one had to fall on his sword. But basically, people killed one another. It was not really committing suicide. So we are sitting in a place now which basically is focusing on the story of Masada. Today, we have a slogan in the country that says, Masada shall never fall again. It's not Masada for the fortress, it's Masada representing the whole nation. With the revival of the Jewish people coming back to this country after 2,000 years in exile, it was creating something new. Our founding fathers tried to separate, if possible, from the spirit of the Jews in Europe, and to create a new man, so to speak, that goes back to the old days, a farmer, strong, courageous. We needed an episode in our history that we can connect with, which is not biblical. The Bible is a book that Christians, of course, also follow, and therefore David and Gideon and all these mighty heroes were not exclusively Jewish heroes. We needed something that we can connect with that focuses on the nation. So Masada serves a purpose, and for that reason it was a choice that we made, that Masada will tell the story. And the story goes that Masada shall never fall again. That will be the slogan. We are here to stay, and we are here to connect with our ancestors. And for that reason, the story of Masada delivers a message and a warning. We say never again when it comes to the Holocaust. We speak about political freedom. We speak about Masada representing the zeal of the Jewish people here in the state of Israel. And I do want to add to that, if possible, because the people in my country are not very religious by practicing the Bible, by practicing the law. Most people do not practice in the rabbinical way, so to speak. But as a society which is not practicing Judaism in the rabbinical way, we know why we are there. We are there because God keeps his promises. And to live in an era, speaking about my own generation, that God chose to keep his promise and bring the people back, and once again there was a Jewish state, strong, independent in Israel, I do not take it for granted. It's awesome for me. And therefore we live in times that Masada served a very important purpose as a symbol. Not everybody likes it. But it's important also to note that the story usually goes, the Jews committed suicide. Well, that's not the story. Jews do not commit suicide. Well, some people do, obviously, because God gave you life, and God is the one to take it away. You do not take your own life. In the Jewish traditions, if somebody did kill himself, he would be buried outside the cemetery or closer to the fence, but not with all the others. He did something which is unacceptable. And therefore, everything had to be done by a certain protocol. People killed one another. They did not commit suicide. I know it sounds like nuances which are not important. It's critical to understand the mindset. And therefore, to choose Masada to represent the national zeal of today is very meaningful to the people in my country. So to say Masada shall never fall again, you can buy the t-shirt if you wish, is representing a whole message. So when I mention the 3 must locations, Western Wall, Masada, Holocaust Museum, Masada is the one that speaks about the national zeal and speaks about the nation basically reborn. For 2,000 years, the focus was on Jewish religion. Now we are back to focus on the Jewish national aspirations, and Israel is the outcome of that kind of mindset, and we do believe. We do believe because we are the fulfillment of biblical prophecies, and we are there because God keeps his promises. And to that to happen in our generation, my generation basically is the first generation in Israel that can say that we live as free people in our own country. 3 years after the Holocaust, Jewish independence, there is no such story in world history. And to make it more symbolic, in the synagogue that you just saw over there, they found scrolls from the whole Bible. The most important part was Ezekiel 37. Ezekiel 37 is the vision of dry bones. The vision of dry bones speaks about the whole nation that is dead, coming back to life, and the Spirit of God is breathed into them. How symbolic to find in Masada representing a nation. 3 years after the ashes of Auschwitz, to be a nation once again. As I said, we like those symbolisms, and therefore Masada plays a very important part to represent the spirit of the people of Israel today. Well, this was our stop number 1 for today. And with your permission, we are going now to Engedi, but I am afraid that the quality of the video is not that great. Well, we'll see, and if it will really, really be horrible, which may be the case, I'll stop it and just compliment that. We'll see how it works, okay? So let's see. This is a section from the virtual tour that we have. Okay, let's see.
It's beautiful. Fresh water running through the desert. Absolutely amazing. We are visiting now a place called Ein Gedi, which is by the shores of the Dead Sea. Ein Gedi means in Hebrew the spring of the young goat. And water feeds a spring which is about a mile away from here, and that's what flows behind me straight down to the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. We are in the Judean wilderness right now, a place of refuge to a lot of people wanted by the authorities, and maybe David is the most famous one, but not the only one. This place is...
No, I'm sorry, the quality is definitely not good enough, so let me just compliment some of it, okay? And promise to fix it for next time, in a few years. The thing is that Ein Gedi, the spring of the young goat, is one of the nice oases in the desert. Water in the desert is attracting people, and since the desert was a place of refuge for people wanted by the authorities, they had to come to the water holes every now and then. And the Bible speaks about an encounter that took place in that very location in the first book of Samuel, chapter 24. David, a young fugitive who was running for his life in the Judean wilderness for years now, and Saul is sending his army down to try to find him. And the Bible tells us time after time, the king is recruiting his elite forces, 3,000 men, and is going down into the desert to try to find David and his brigade of 600 outlaws, as the Bible tells us. And sometimes he was that close to find David, but then a messenger comes and tells the king that the Philistines invaded the land and he has to stop his pursuit and go to fight the Philistines. That was like a cat and mouse game that took place for a long time in the desert, but it came to a climax in the area of Ein Gedi that you see over there, in a cave in the area. Which cave was it? Nobody knows. And therefore, just point at one and you'll be as right as anybody else. Had to be a big cave. Because the Bible tells us that Saul had to relieve himself. I'm using now the biblical language. And he went into a cave, not knowing that David and his men are hiding in that cave. Now you're coming from the bright sun into a dark cave. You can't really see what happens in the recesses of it. 600 men are just lying there, amazed by the opportunity. They try to encourage David. Well, the king is in your hands. Go and kill him. You are the chosen one. It's your time. In other words, we hate the desert. We are your friends. Give us some good positions while you're king. And David says, no, just a minute now. This is the God's anointed. I'm not going to touch the God's anointed. But he wanted to prove Saul that he spared his life, so the Bible tells us the king is busy, and David, that's my imagination, is scrolling really quietly and cuts the corner of the robe of Saul, and the Saul is done and leaves the cave to join the army. David comes out holding a piece of fabric. My Lord the king, he cries out, and Saul turns around, and this conversation between the two, the king is breaking in tears, admitting that David is a better man. What a drama. And everything takes place in a cave when the water flows down below and Saul's army is on one side and David and his men are on the other side and the big cave behind them. Well, now when you revealed your position, what will stop Saul from really take you out? Because he knows where you're at and you're trapped in the cave. But the way that the story ends is that Saul admits that David is a better man and he's asking David to make him a promise. When you're king, he says, spare the life of my family. David makes a promise that he's not going to keep. David promised Saul he's going to spare his family, but under some circumstances, David will take out most of Saul's family later on. And we are not speaking about it now, but it's all in the scriptures. So another oasis in the desert. What you find in the desert, quite rich wildlife. These are the mountain goats or the ibex. And when we speak about the Dead Sea Scrolls, most of it was written on ibex skin. It's a kosher animal because it has a split hoof, which is completely divided and chews the cud. If you go to Leviticus 11, you do have the 3 criteria of what we make food kosher. So ibex is kosher. I never ate ibex, but technically it's kosher. So is giraffe, by the way. I wonder, giraffe steak, huh? Interesting. Never tasted this one. And of course, we have lots of camels because it's the desert. So you expect to have camels in the desert, and you see them roaming in the area. Look how green it is. So in the right season, the desert is green. In the right season, if you go to Isaiah 35, the desert is indeed blooming and blossom. That's how it looks like in between, I would say, March to May. So that will be Ein Gedi, a short visit. I'm apologizing. And the last one for today is going to be Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the most important discovery that was ever made in Israel. Some people will say around the world, when it comes to biblical material, when it comes to scriptures speaking about the Word of God. Over the 19th century, in European universities, scholars started questioning the integrity of the Word of God. And the main argument they made was that the most ancient manuscript in Hebrew, I say again in Hebrew, that we had of the Torah and the Bible, was a book that is called the Aleppo Codex. Aleppo is a town in Syria that was written in Tiberias, the last years of the 10th century. It was only 1,000 years old. And the argument was, where is the guarantee? Because we're missing hundreds of years. We don't have anything older than 1,000 years. Can we really trust that codex? It's only 1,000 years old. Let me say it loud and clear. The Bible is the Word of God, period. No need to prove it in any way. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, if proof was needed, that would be the answer. Because overnight, they found scrolls 1,000 years older than the oldest known until then. And when you try to compare them with what we call today the Masoretic text, it's almost identical. So if proof was needed that what we read today was indeed written by the prophets, and very diligently scribes are writing those time after time after time, all the way down to our days, if such proof was needed, the Dead Sea Scrolls are indeed the proof. But I do want to separate totally the Dead Sea Scrolls from the site of Qumran. Until about 15, 20 years ago, there was a paradigm. No scholars were questioning that. The Dead Sea Scrolls were written by a group of people called the Essenes that lived in the area of Qumran, period. Well, today, this idea was challenged by other scholars, and the new theories are making much more sense. And I can bring up a lot of questions that we cannot answer, but one thing is beyond controversy: the authenticity of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Who wrote them? Where? That's not important. It's interesting because it's intriguing to try to answer the question, but nobody questions the age of the Dead Sea Scrolls and their authenticity. And therefore, the discovery is absolutely amazing. And the question is there a connection between the site called Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls? Let's try to answer part of the questions. That's how the community used to look like, just a kind of an impression how the place used to look like, because even today scholars wonder what was Qumran for. It was not a community big enough to accommodate hundreds of people. People lived there, but nothing was found to indicate scrolls. Not a single piece of parchment, no ink, absolutely nothing. So the question is there a connection between the site and the scrolls? And the question is not that important, to be honest with you, because what is important is the authenticity of the scrolls. Well, they excavated the area because the first scrolls were found by sheer chance, as all great discoveries. November 1947, 2 Bedouin shepherds are on their way from Bethlehem down to the Dead Sea. They arrive to the area of Qumran. They realize that one of the sheep is missing. So like any other good shepherd, they leave the 99 and go to look for the one. And as they were going into caves to try to find the sheep, they found jars, and in the jars there was some material that looked very important. The first 7 scrolls were found. They took it up to Bethlehem to one of those antique dealers over there, a man by the name of Halil Shaheen, and showed him what was found in the desert. He understood that this is important, so he's calling a friend of his, a Syrian monk. And this monk is coming very quickly and tells him, not important, I'll buy it from you for pennies. The man bought it, all right? He knew. So he bought some for pennies, and he's calling an Israeli scholar, Lipa Sukenik. And Mr. Sukenik is coming in much haste to Bethlehem. It's 1947. The roads are not safe. The War of Independence started already. But Mr. Sukenik is able to purchase for a lot of money from that Syrian monk who purchased it for pennies for the antique dealer over there, the first 3 scrolls. The whole scroll of Isaiah, all 66 chapters, written 2,200 years ago. Do you understand how important that is? Not divided to chapters, by the way. That will only happen later on. Okay? But it's all there. And he tells in his memoirs that when he was looking at the Hebrew text and the alphabet, he could hear in the radio how the UN is voting for the founding of the State of Israel. The 29th of November, 1947. You're still looking for symbolisms? Well, here is another one for you. So when the rumors spread that treasures are to be found by the Dead Sea, everybody in the area went down to reveal treasures. And lots of damage was done as well. Because if you're a Bedouin nomad who lives in the area, you only treat those scrolls as a moneymaker, because the authorities in Jordan, that was Jordanian territory, said, if you bring us a piece, we'll pay you $1,000. Well, if you have a nice piece, cut it to 4. You make 4 times more, right? Damage was done, we know for sure. But more than 20,000 pieces were found. And that's a treasure that we have today from every book in the Old Testament, except for Esther and Nehemiah. But Ezra and Nehemiah were one book back at a time. And Ezra was found, 1 copy, so let's give them the benefit of the doubt that Nehemiah was also found. They found a lot of material that was more sectarian. They found books from the Apocrypha that we did not even know that existed. And everything is written in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and a language called Nabatean. And the Nabateans are a nation of nomads. Why would anybody write anything from the Word of God in Nabatean? Do you try to evangelize them? Do you try to convert them? So we have many questions because we do not fully understand many things about the Dead Sea Scrolls. All of them are written with black ink, 4 with red ink. Why? Hard to tell. They're able to identify 150 different styles of handwriting that will indicate at least 150 different scribes. How many scribes were there in Israel in every given moment? Maybe a handful? So to think that all of them lived in one small community to produce about 1,000 scrolls, it doesn't make sense. So today there's a new theory about where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, found by whom. They analyzed the ink, for example, and they could find in the ink a little bit of Dead Sea water. Meaning what? It had to be written by the Dead Sea. You can take Dead Sea water here to Spokane and use it here. So there's no connection necessarily. So the question is, who made this connection and how come that paradigm was there for such a long time? I need to run all these through to get to the great finale. Just up here for a minute, that's what was found in the site of Qumran. And anything that is connected to scrolls, well, almost nothing. That will be an inkstand over there. So this is the only thing that you can make connect with scrolls, but no parchment. By the way, when you try to figure out the age of the scrolls, you can carbon date the parchment. You can. You cannot carbon date the ink. You understand what I'm saying, all right? So you can know how old is the parchment. And the parchment is made of ibex skin, cow skin, papyrus, 7 of them, and 1 was written on copper. The copper scroll was found in 1952. It has instructions how to find the treasure. Another Indiana Jones mission, huh? How to find the treasure. It gives all kinds of clues. What treasures are we talking about? Is it possible that the temple treasures were hidden by the priests as the Roman army was approaching, and they left behind a document that nobody knows how to follow today because it makes no sense? You go behind the nose of the camel, you're stepping 50 steps, on the right-hand side you see the tail of the goat. Come on, give me a break. I mean, how can you find? But people tried to find the treasure, so this is quite a unique discovery as well. Well, let's bring that to conclusion by hearing this. This is also part of the virtual tour that we just produced, the Galilee Academy. You have it on sale if anybody's interested to see the full product. What I do is the presentation mode.
The site of Qumran is an historic and an archaeological enigma. Many questions that arose during the excavations we cannot really answer. It was occupied by Jews, no doubt, and to testify to that will be the many ritual cleansing facilities that were found, and nobody else was using those but Jews. Yet no living quarters were found. And therefore the question is, what exactly was Qumran for? Some scholars do believe it was indeed the headquarters of people who lived in maybe temporary dwellings in the area, maybe in caves in the area. Some scholars do believe that Qumran was a military post or maybe a beautiful villa of a wealthy family in Jerusalem, because jewelry was found here in the area as well. Until about 15 years ago, there was a certain paradigm regarding Qumran. All the scholars that were dealing with the Dead Sea Scrolls agreed that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written here by a group of people called the Essenes, and they lived in the area, maybe in caves in the area, and they produced about 1,000 scrolls. Well, a few scholars will debate that, and there are some other theories regarding that. 3 ancient sources speak about the Essenes. We don't even know the right name in Hebrew because it's all in Greek and in Latin. And therefore, even the term Essenes or Isim in Hebrew, we speculate Essenoi will be the term in Greek. The first one, Josephus Flavius, a well-known historian who lived in the country, knew them very well, tried to become an Essene himself. And he said that we speak about the groups of men alone, that lived in different towns and cities in the country. He's not mentioning the Dead Sea. The other source that mentions them is a Greek, Jewish, Egyptian person by the name of Philo, and he wrote in Greek as well, and he said the same thing. We speak about men that lived in communities around the country. He doesn't mention the Dead Sea either. The only historian that mentions the Dead Sea is a Roman one, and that would be Pliny the Elder, a man who died when Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried Pompeii under it, and he's the only one who speaks about the Essenes and mentions the Dead Sea. And therefore, to make that connection based on script or based on evidences at the time, there's no connection to the Dead Sea. And therefore, most likely, the Essenes did not live in the area, and maybe they were or not the authors or the scribes who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's not the point. One thing is beyond any controversy. One thing all the scholars agree, and that will be the fact that the Dead Sea Scrolls are authentic. We don't speak about something that was written later on. We speak about authentic material.
Well, that's the most important thing. And since I promised you some fun toward the end of the day, well, let's enjoy that. That's salt, huh? Salt crystal. Looks fun, huh? Yeah. Well, after a day of driving through the desert, and usually in the summertime, the water is so hot. It's like dipping in a bowl of soup, right? It's oily. Summertime, wintertime is refreshing. And we have this habit to have a lot of black mud on the shores, and you take some and smear it all over yourself because of the minerals in the mud. I'm sure that many of you heard about the Dead Sea products or the Dead Sea cosmetic products. They're well known around the world. So when you have that much tourism, and you have that much mining of minerals, and you have this cosmetic industry, why call it a Dead Sea? I mean, this place is a source of life to so many people, very rich history, and one of the really beautiful and impressive places in the country. Well, thank you, folks. Session one is over, and I owe you 2.5 minutes from yesterday. I just gave you back 45 seconds. And if you please be back in about 10 minutes, because now we're going up to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be the climax of the whole tour that we are going to take. And if you thought that you received a lot of information, when it comes to Jerusalem, the details do matter. So next session, we are going to introduce the city to you, and we are going to walk the Palm Sunday road from the Mount of Olives down to the Garden of Gethsemane. We'll walk the way of the cross. We'll see the upper room, part of the Jewish quarter. It's going to be a fascinating day. So please be back in 10 minutes, and we'll start at 7:40. Thank you. Okay, folks, let us begin. Is this projector stronger than it was before? Or, I know, just... Ladies and gentlemen, quoting from the Jewish Talmud, which is the main book of commentary, someplace it says the following: 10 measures of beauty were given to the world, 9 to Jerusalem and 1 to the rest of the world. 10 measures of holiness were given to the world, 9 to Jerusalem and 1 to the rest of the world. 10 measures of wisdom and 10 measures of suffering were given to the world, 9 to Jerusalem and 1 to the rest of the world. And this is to show you, of course, the position of the city in the very heart, not just of the Jewish people, but close to 4 billion people on our planet. We look at Jerusalem, considering it the holiest place on earth. That will be a very flattering situation for the city, but very dangerous one as well. Unfortunately, although the meaning of the name Yerushalayim is the city of peace, this city did not see that much peace in its long history. It's a place of controversy, and maybe today more than ever before. And as you will hear from me standing on Mount of Olives, when the prophet Zechariah chapter 2 said that the city will be a stumbling stone, a cup of trouble, again, I think that he predicted and prophesied about our days today, when Jerusalem is indeed a center of controversy. The whole world has opinions what should be the future of the city. The Jewish state, of course, is claiming Jerusalem as capital, and nobody agrees except for the Trump administration was the one that officially recognized Jerusalem as capital. That was a breakthrough to other countries. So you do understand how important is the city to so many people, and that's what brings that controversy. Day number 1 in Jerusalem, which is day number 6 of the tour, will take us to some of the key locations, and the city is not that big. And when we go to see the biblical parts of it, it's even smaller, but it's a lot to cover. So it will be divided to 3 days. The first 2 ones will focus on the biblical part of Jerusalem in and around the old city. And the last day, we are going to speak about the new city of Jerusalem, the Israel Museum, the Holocaust Museum, etc. And we'll bring everything to conclusion as it should be on such tours, celebrating communion in the Garden Tomb or Mount Calvary. Not even virtually, I just mentioned the place, all right? But everything is built in a certain way, and that should be the highlight of the whole tour. And we're going to try to clarify some questions that people have, because I can tell you right away, there are 2 places in Jerusalem that the Christian world is celebrating or commemorating as Mount Golgotha. One is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre today, other one is the Garden Tomb. And we go back to the classical question, how come we don't know the very location? And you know the answer, because we don't have enough geographical data. If the Bible would have mentioned to us to which direction Jesus went with the cross, we could even follow and come to one conclusion to say this is the place, but the Bible doesn't say that. And therefore there's more than one possible location. So we'll try to address those issues without saying who's right and who's wrong. These are matters of faith. These are matters of the heart. You don't have to prove anything. But if you're part of Jerusalem and you come to the city, you'll be confused, because how come we have 2 different locations to commemorate the same thing? 5 different sites for the Ascension and Second Coming, all authentic. Yes, I'm being sarcastic. But the Bible says the Mount of Olives. Where exactly? You understand the problem. One of the tours, forgive me for a little joke, standing on Mount of Olives, and the lady comes to me, she's very concerned, said, well, you know, about the second coming, where is he going to touch down? So many houses in the air, there's no room for the second coming. I said, well, ma'am, he'll find a way. So, well, people have those different approaches, which is kind of interesting to see how each one understands the Bible, of course, and what he sees in Jerusalem. Let's start with a little kind of a short movie to go over the important parts in Jerusalem. And this is the rock face of the Garden Tomb. This will be Mount Calvary, and the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is right in front of you. And we'll go to see some parts of the city from above using a drone. And trust me, to fly a drone above Temple Mount, that's not easy to get permission to do. Yeah? Maybe the most famous picture from Jerusalem is indeed Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock. This was taken in COVID days, so there's hardly any traffic in Jerusalem, which was great, I have to say. That's a little collage of different starts in town. Some of you that have been to Israel and Jerusalem should recognize some of the sites and some of the locations. The only time that the gates of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre were closed, the only time since 1099. Damascus gates area and the eastern gates of the cemetery. Okay, folks, let's start with the topography because the topography is important in order to understand the city's history. You cannot understand the history if you don't understand the topography. Well, here is a picture taken by a German pilot in the early 30s, and that shows you Jerusalem, basically, in the early 30s of the 20th century. You can see from above some of the topography, and we can name some of the mountains and some of the valleys, which are so important in order to understand the story. If you know the city's topography, you begin to understand why the city has a certain history, why enemies always invaded from the north, and how come there's only one water source, and why wasn't the city growing. So to understand mountains and valleys will help us a lot to understand the rest of the story. And I do want to point at some of them. The city itself is situated on two main hills. We speak about biblical Jerusalem. I don't mean to confuse you, but the city today is 100 times bigger, all right, than what we call the old city. So the old city of Jerusalem only covers 1% from the 30,000 acres that make the city's territory today. So you don't speak about Jerusalem today. We're going to focus on the old part of town, and that's what the map shows you basically. We do have a mountain on the eastern side, which is called the Mount of Olives. Down below, there is a deep depression called the Kidron Valley. Means a dark place, also called the Valley of Jehoshaphat. According to the book of Joel chapter 3, a place of judgment for the nations. That's what Jehoshaphat means in Hebrew, God will judge. And then you have the other hill, which is Mount Moriah. This is Mount Moriah. So think about two hills and a deep valley cutting through. This is higher than this one, which means that Mount Moriah, which is the holiest place and the only one the Bible calls holy, is under the mountains of Jerusalem. You would assume that the holiest place will be on top of the hills, and you can see that from every corner. No, not in Jerusalem. In fact, the mountains around the city are much higher. So only when you're standing on top of the hills, you see down below you the holiest place. And you would wonder, that's inappropriate. You want to have the holiest place on the mountaintop. Well, there's a reason. If you think about this whole area as a huge natural arena, when people come to celebrate, only if that's a topography, you can accommodate a lot of people, almost like seats around, and they can see the temple down below. If it's situated on the mountaintop, you don't have that much room to accommodate that many people. So topography had to be considered as well when you build in the rituals. When you guys say holy cow, for example, it's something biblical. You go to Numbers chapter 19, the Bible speaks about the holy cow, the red heifer. And there was a certain way to offer the red heifer that had to consider topography. Problem is that the law, including all those details, was given to the Israelites in the desert. The desert landscape is not the same as Jerusalem. So you do understand that you have to make some adjustments. Because when God pointed at Mount Moriah to David and told him, you purchase this place, this is the place that I want to establish my name. You start looking around to see, okay, how are we considering the topography to fit in the rituals given in the desert in a different landscape? Everything has to fit. It's all pieces in one big puzzle. So there is a reason why the holiest place is not up on the mountain, but down below, and everything around looks like a huge arena, like watching a show, like going to the amphitheater, basically. Everything happens down below you. And therefore, the mountains around Jerusalem are higher. Mount of Olives is divided into a few sections. This one is called the Mount of Corruption, the Mount of Shame, the Mount of Abomination. The Bible tells us when Solomon was king, He married many wives and had many concubines, and each of those wives coming to join the king in Jerusalem brought an entourage with her, including images of her national god. And Solomon built temples for those images. The god of the Ammonites, and the god of the Moabites, and the god of the Edomites. And these temples were built on Mount of Olives above the city of David, which means if the city of David is down here, and the temples were built over here, the Bible calls it the Mount of Abomination. Interesting, those temples were not destroyed by great kings that Judah had. Nobody dared to touch them. Hezekiah, Uzziah. King Josiah was the only one that dared to destroy those places, and for that reason the Bible credits him. Josiah is the only king that the Bible has nothing negative to say about. The Bible criticizes all the kings except for Josiah. What gave him the credit is destroying those places of abomination. So the southern peak of Mount of Olives, this one, is called the Mount of Corruption. City of David is down this way. That's where the story begins. City of David, the southern slope of a whole hillside, which is called Mount Moriah. So all of this is Mount Moriah, and lo and behold, the garden tomb, Mount Calvary, is here, the highest spot of Mount Moriah. And the valley is cutting through. We have another valley called the Central Valley. Josephus Flavius, that gives us a description of Jerusalem, calls it the Tyropean in Greek, which means the valley of the cheesemakers, for some reason. We'll call it the Central Valley, and the valley of Gehenna. All right? The valley of Gehenna, Gehenna in Hebrew means hell, and the name was given by the prophet Jeremiah. That's what the kings of Judah, Manasseh, Ammon, were making human sacrifices, right, to the gods of the Canaanites in Jerusalem, for goodness sake. So Jeremiah called it the burning place, or Gehenna, or the Hinnom Valley. So that will be the topography of Jerusalem, mountains all around. There's one valley, two valleys, three valleys, and that forms a letter in Hebrew, which is called the letter Shin. Some of you may know that. You do see the shape, like 3 fingers, and Shin is one of the letters in the many names of God in the Bible. So when God says, I'm going to stamp my name on the mountains of Jerusalem, amen to that. That's exactly how the whole area looks like, a gigantic Shin imprinted on the mountains and valleys of Jerusalem. Zooming in to the city of David, just to get a little closer to understand that, well, that will be the beginning of the story. A long, narrow hillside, sandwiched between the Kidron Valley and the Central Valley, the southern slope of a whole mountain that we call Mount Moriah. And the reason is one. That's where the spring flows. There's only one water source in Jerusalem, one spring only. So obviously people had to live by the spring. We spoke about layers, we spoke about mound. Jerusalem is no exception. So the city could not grow beyond the annual flow of the spring of Jerusalem. Under a mighty king like David, how big you think was the city? The mightiest capital under the mightiest king. What about 1,500 to 2,000 people at the most? Because of one main reason. There wasn't enough water. And you need water for irrigation and laundry and just household. And therefore the city was not that big because of the water issue. Jerusalem has a very ancient history, and we have a lot of documents that speak about the city, and just to mention one. In Egypt, in the 20th century BC or so, there was a certain tradition in the Egyptian army that whenever they marched to battle, they will write the name of the enemy on clay figurines and will smash it down to the ground, hoping that that's what will happen to the enemy in the battlefield. And when they found a pile of pieces of pottery, they found the name of Jerusalem, which means that Jerusalem was one of the targets for the Egyptian army. And that's puzzling because the Egyptian army tried very hard not to enter the mountainous area. They stayed down along the trade routes, remember? So something happened, or Jerusalem suddenly caught the attention of Pharaoh, so he invested his army to go up to the mountains. We don't know the reason why, by the way. Because Jerusalem's location is of no significance. If I gave you a mission to find a capital for the land of Israel, the last place you will choose is Jerusalem. It's not by the main roads. It doesn't have enough water. It doesn't have enough farmland. There's only one thing, the most important one. That's the place that God chose. And therefore, Jerusalem is not a central location to the local trade. It's a central location because that was the place that God chose to establish his name, and he ordered David to build a temple, and that's it. So there used to be a time that for some reason even the Egyptian army was marching up to conquer Jerusalem. We found the name in the letters of El Amarna. It's a whole archive of the Egyptian Foreign Office from the 14th century BC. Pharaoh is corresponding with subject kings or client kings, and the king of Jerusalem is mentioned as well. So Jerusalem had a layer. We speak before the days of David, keep in mind. Sometimes between the days of Melchizedek and the days of David. They had professional diplomats, people that were literate, people that knew languages, people that understood politics in the area. So the town of Jebus, the name before David conquered it, was a very sophisticated location. And David basically conquered the city, or conquered a town, that he did not know at first how to recruit for his own favor. We speak about a very, I don't mean to offend David, all right? A simple shepherd boy that was not really enjoying royal pomp as Solomon will, a warrior all of his life. He had to start from scratch just to build an empire. How do you do that without mastering the basic skills of literacy, of knowing languages, of understanding the region? You do understand the challenge. And David conquered and prevailed. He built the largest empire that Israel ever had. It was indeed the largest force in the area, at least for a while. His son Solomon will lose everything. But that's another story. And therefore, Jerusalem had that skills. There were professional diplomats, and it all preceded the days of David. So we speak about the very rich history that the city has. We meet Jerusalem in the Bible for the first time in the book of Joshua. Joshua 12 has a list of 31 cities that were conquered by the Israelites, and that will include Jerusalem. Now it's amazing. The Bible says that the tribe of Judah conquered Jerusalem. Then it says the tribe of Benjamin conquered Jerusalem. So if that was the case, how come David had to fight for the city 400 years later? Was Jerusalem conquered or was it not conquered? Let me make a suggestion. Please make a distinction between conquering a place and inhabiting a place. If you come from the desert as a nation of nomads and you conquer those mighty cities, and you try to establish yourself as an urban society, it takes time for a clan of nomads to understand city life. And therefore, many of these places were taken by the tribes of Israel, but they moved on without inhabiting them. So the locals came back and started all over again. So Jerusalem was conquered, and then it was lost because the tribe of Judah chose, for some reason, not to settle the place. That would be the way to understand. Was the city conquered, or was it not? Well, yes, it was. But they decided not to inhabit it. It happened in many other places as well. So we do have evidences about Jerusalem archaeologically, which are about 5,000 years back in time, long before the days of David. So this is just to give you a short introduction about Jerusalem city, and let's speak about our day of touring for today. That will be our day number 1 in Jerusalem after we set the scene, topography, geography, etc. Well, here is a map of the old city. And the arrow over there is pointing at our starting point. That will be the Mount of Olives. What we're going to cover today, and one thing that I'm sure that you appreciate, that this is a virtual tour, is that you're not going to go down the very deep hillsides and climb. There's not a single leveled place in Jerusalem. Whenever you go, it's climbing up and down, and physically it's quite a challenge. And some people are struggling with visiting Jerusalem, and there's a way to make it a little easier, but there's not a way to see the city. You cannot drive a bus through the very narrow streets of the old city, so topography presents a certain challenge. Plan for today, we're going to walk down the Palm Sunday Road, going through the place where Jesus prophesied the destruction of the temple, down to the Garden of Gethsemane. We'll go through Stephen's Gate into the old city. These are the walls of the old city. We'll walk the way of the cross, we'll go out to the Jewish quarter, and then we'll make our way to the upper room in David's tomb. Traditional locations we have to add. David's tomb is not David's tomb, period. The upper room may be the upper room. As we said, we do not know the exact location. We know the neighborhood. But with excavations, we're coming closer sometimes to point at the place to say, yes, we have enough material to point at one stone to say, this is it. So whenever we will be in that condition, I'll promise to share that with you. What an amazing view. Let me start with a verse from the Bible.
Psalms 125, verse 2. As the mountains round about Jerusalem, so the Lord is all around his people. And this will be a very accurate description of Jerusalem's geography and topography in the days of King David, in the days of the temple. We are standing now on top of Mount of Olives. And most of the pilgrims that came to Jerusalem from Galilee, from Babylon, from any other corner north to Israel, would usually take the road along the Jordan Valley, would climb from Jericho, and after a steep climb, when you're weary, you're tired, you find yourself standing on the top of Mount of Olives, and down below you, you see the facade of the temple. What an exciting moment that would be. It is true that the city is surrounded by mountains, and therefore you may climb up to Jerusalem, but you have to do that with faith because you do not see the destination of your pilgrimage. Only when you come to the mountains around Jerusalem, down below you, in a huge natural arena, you see the temple. Which means coming from north, or from south, or from east, or from west. Not before you come to the mountains overlooking Jerusalem, you can see the city. And once you set eye on the city for the first time, it's a reason for a celebration. And therefore, not just Jerusalem is holy, but all the mountains around Jerusalem will have something attached to them. Since the Mount of Olives is the closest one to the temple, and most people came indeed from that direction, that's what made the Mount of Olives so important. It was a place of worship before the temple was built on top of Mount Moriah. We are told in 2 Samuel, when David flees from Jerusalem, the Bible tells us from his son Absalom, he's climbing the Mount of Olives where he worshipped God. So that was a high place, a place of worship. The whole mountain was covered by olive groves and not by the graveyard as today. And walking down the hill as Jesus did, you're indeed walking in the shade of the olive trees. We know the place from the scriptures. It is mentioned many times. The prophetic prophecy of Zechariah 14 will speak about the day of the Lord and how God is going to stand on that mountain, and the mountain will be split into two. We do know that the Palm Sunday walk that Jesus took that Sunday started here in a small town called Bethphage, walking down the hillside. That's where he taught the disciples to pray the Lord's Prayer. And since the Bible never tells us that Jesus stayed inside the city overnight, we have to come to the conclusion that most of the intimate time that he spent with the disciples was either in Bethany, only about a mile away from here, or under the olive trees, in caves maybe, on the Mount of Olives. Today it's a graveyard, and we'll speak about the graveyard maybe a little later on, but try to ignore that. If you want to see the city as it was back in biblical days, wasn't as big as you see it in front of you, just focus on the Golden Dome. That's where the temple used to be.
Today the Mount of Olives is indeed a massive graveyard. When the Roman army laid siege around Jerusalem, Josephus tells us to have a clear line of fire for the Roman catapults. They simply uprooted all the trees in the area and 20 miles around Jerusalem. The only ones that were left, if indeed they are 2,000 years old, are the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane. Let me say it right away, they cannot be 2,000 years old. So what used to be a mountain covered by olive groves today is a large Jewish cemetery, the largest Jewish cemetery in the world. And without speaking about the Jewish burial ritual, just to point at the fact that the boxes that you see over there, these are not the tombs. These are tombstones. People are not buried inside. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, people are buried in a pit about 5 feet deep, not in a casket, in a big blanket called a prayer shawl or a talit. That would be the traditional way to Jewish burial. And our tradition is that those people who are buried opposite to the temple area, along the way of the Messiah, will be the first ones to be raised from the dead. So people are paying quite a lot of money to be buried over there. I guess I'll have to wait a few seconds because I won't be buried over there. But that's a tradition. So think about 150,000 graves, and you do see the small pebbles on top, small stones over there. See that? Well, just like flowers, cheaper, last longer, it's our tradition that every anniversary the spirit of the deceased is literally coming to the tombstone and counts the stones to see how many people still remember and pay their respects. If you remember Schindler's List, and some of you may have seen the movie, that's how it ends. He's buried in Jerusalem, by the way. And the people, the Jews that he basically saved, are coming to show their respect and leave a small stone on his tombstone. So today, that's how the Mount of Olives looks like. But if you're walking down the Palm Sunday, once again, most everything was filmed and done in COVID days, so some sites were not open, all right? So I don't have little videos on each side, just of the main ones, and we had to go back again and again to do some filming. The road will take you down to the Garden of Gethsemane, and that will be the Church of All Nations in the Garden of Gethsemane. So you're going down a very steep hillside, and the Garden of Gethsemane is the place, according to Matthew 26 and other Gospels, that's where after having the Last Supper, Jesus and his disciples are leaving town. They stay very close to the city, within the Sabbath day's journey, and in that garden, Judas betrays Jesus, as you remember. The garrison is coming from the high priest's home, and Jesus is arrested, and they take him up into the city. I'll show you on the map tomorrow, to the high priest for his first trial, and then to Pontius Pilate the following day, etc. So that's where it begins. He is arrested in that area. The church is church number 3 to be built in the same location. It was dedicated 1924. It's called the Church of All Nations, and 12 nations that fought against each other during WW1 donated money as a symbol of reconciliation to build the building. All right, it's really a nice one. You see the mosaics over there, etc. There were 2 deer on both sides, all right, one here and one here, and these were stolen one day in 2008, and now they made new ones. The deers are in, at least in Christian art, was symbolizing the faithful believer. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul pants to you, O Lord, in Psalms 42. So usually when you see a deer, that's what it symbolizes. And there were 2 deer on both sides, beautiful big reindeer. They are back now. So this picture was taken a few years ago, as you understand. And that's how the garden looks like today. You see the olive trees. The oldest one in the garden is believed to be about 1,200 years old. But olive trees have a very unusual nature of rejuvenating. When one of the branches is touching the ground, it will send roots inside, and a new tree is born, so to speak. So let's say that these are the grandchildren trees of those from the days of Jesus. Fair enough? Okay, the kids, all right, or the grandkids. And you do see an olive press, because Gethsemane means in Hebrew an olive press. And it wasn't the only one. The whole mountain was an industrious area, and from those many olive presses, the olive oil was provided to the temple for the temple rituals. And they used that for many reasons. So the Mount of Olives had its value also as industry. And of course, as we said today, so many things are connected to the Mount of Olives, and we mentioned few in the short movie earlier. And the other one will be the Church of Dominus Flevit. Our Lord is weeping, Luke 19:41-44. Jesus speaks about the temple's destruction, and he's weeping over the city. So that's what this little chapel is commemorating. It's called the Chapel of the Teardrop. The view is amazing from over there. And these are the main locations that you visit as you're walking down the Palm Sunday Road, still outside the city walls. As you carry on and you are crossing the Kidron Valley down here, you find yourself standing right outside Lion's Gate, and this will be the moment that you're entering the city as well.
In 1219, the walls of Jerusalem were dismantled by the local Muslim Sultan. And for 300 years, Jerusalem had no defenses. The Ottoman conquest was in 1517, and Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan, decided to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Construction started in 1537 and went on for 5 years. The walls that you see behind me are the walls of the old city of Jerusalem today that were built by the Ottomans in the 16th century. The main gate on the eastern side is what you see behind me. And this gate is known by 2 names, Lion's Gate or Stephen's Gate. It is a tradition that through that gate, Stephen was led down to the Kidron Valley for his martyrdom. And through that gate, in June 7th of 1967, the Israeli paratroopers broke through the walls of Jerusalem to liberate the city. Lion Gate, named after 2 pairs of leopards that you see on both sides of the gate. These are not meant to be here. The 2 leopards were part of the coat of arms of a Mameluke sultan called Baybars, and they were brought here from some part of town to decorate the city walls and the city gates from the 16th century.
Well, since we are talking about a city of the 16th century, and we want to focus on the city from the days of Jesus, the way to do that is to use a tool to help us, and that tool is a scale model of Jerusalem, which is in the Israel Museum. It was specially built for this purpose because you're looking at the city today, 21st century, go figure how exactly the city used to look like. And those details are important to try to complete the picture, to which direction Jesus went, what were the main buildings in the city. So that model is an excellent tool and really helps us a lot. You don't understand that excavations in Jerusalem today, in order to go down under living quarters, you need to have the consent of the owners. People live there. When we speak about layers, okay, Jerusalem follows the same idea of layers. The problem is that the place is constantly inhabited. So you cannot just remove the houses because you want to excavate. We don't do that. But there is a loophole. And the loophole is that no law in the city says how deep under your property is still your property. All the way to Australia, or maybe only 20 feet, it doesn't say that. So if you go deep enough under the foundations of a certain building, the owner above has no claim about violating his rights. And therefore, using that loophole, it made excavations in Jerusalem possible, because the only other option is clear all neighborhoods and start digging, which we do not do, regardless the accusations they bring against us that we destroy Arab homes. Nonsense. But the challenge is, when you come to Jerusalem today, you spend most of your time underground. And that can disorient you totally, because once you go underground, go figure where are you in relation to what part of town. But it's not a way. Whenever we can do these excavations out in the open, of course we'll do that. But in most places, you're going down into those caves. And it's quite amazing what was found, and they keep finding stuff all the time. So we're going to use that little model in order to show you what would be the path to enter the city. If you come from outside from the Mount of Olives, you're going through Stephen's Gate, and the first thing that you hit is the Pool of Bethesda. I'm sure that you all remember what happened there in John chapter 5. That's where Jesus healed a man who was sick for 38 years, waiting for the water to stir up. And from here, you're still outside the city, because this model is important. It shows us exactly the different walls of Jerusalem. Now please pay attention, because it's important. This wall here was not built yet in the days of Jesus. The scale model shows you Jerusalem of 66 AD. 66 AD, 30 years after the days of Jesus, give or take. In his days, that was the wall of Jerusalem, not this one. And this is important to understand, because when we try to find Mount Calvary later on, we have to understand that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea had to be outside the walls of the city. Must. Jews do not bury people inside. So when you try to figure out where was the crucifixion, you have to understand that you must be outside the walls of the city. And indeed you would be if this were the days of Jesus, because this wall was built later on. And the two places I'm going to suggest, maybe Mount Calvary, are within this wall. But this wall was not built yet in the days of Jesus. So please keep that in mind. So approaching the city walls, coming from the pool, you're going to go through the gate to a large fortress. That would be Praetorium. Rings a bell? The Bible speaks about the trial of Jesus. It took place in Praetorium. That means headquarters. Now, we didn't mention that term in Caesarea 5 days ago, because Praetorium, number one, was in Caesarea. Every place that the Roman governor would establish his headquarters will be Praetorium. So you come to Jerusalem, and you hate the experience, and you want to position yourself in the only place that really matters, because this huge castle was overlooking the temple's courtyard. That's where you make a difference if you establish yourself here. It was built by King Herod and was dedicated to his master, Mark Antony. Some of you know him as Richard Burton, okay? So Mark Antony was the supreme ruler, and Herod, to honor him, named the fortress the Antonia Fortress. So the Antonia Fortress was also Praetorium. And that was right on the walls of Jerusalem. So you are going into the city, and from that location, the way of the cross begins as well. Before we go there, I do want to point something which is missing, shame on me, on this little slide over there, and that's a sheep gate. The Bible says that by the Pool of Bethesda was a sheep gate. And through that gate, they used to bring the daily offering into the temple Twice a day, there was an official offering that was behalf of the whole nation, and the lambs were sheared and washed in the pool of Bethesda and were taken through that gate into the temple's area. All right? So that's how this part of town used to look like. As you enter the city, you see this. Not always, but in this case, you see this.
We just left the pool of Bethesda behind us, and we are climbing now deeper into the old city of Jerusalem. At that area, the way of the cross begins. It will take some imagination, but if you can just remove all the structure that you see in front of you, and think about a large, massive courtyard, and this courtyard was a courtyard of a fortress that was called Antonia, named after Mark Antony, built by Herod, and Mark Antony was Herod's master, and therefore to honor his master when he built that fortress, he named it after Mark Antony. But this place was also Praetorium. Praetorium is a generic name in Latin, simply means headquarters. Every place in town that the Roman governor will position his headquarters will be called Praetorium. And what would be more suitable than a mighty fortress, which is overlooking the temple's courtyard, than to be a headquarters? And therefore, Praetorium in Jerusalem is the Antonia fortress. And they brought Jesus to this location. And that's where the trial of Jesus took place. And he started walking with the cross from that point on his way to Mount Calvary. And therefore, this place is marking the beginning of the way of the cross, or the Via Dolorosa.
Well, here's one thing that you cannot really appreciate. I'm the only man in the street. Have you any idea how busy this part of town usually is? So you don't understand exactly. COVID days, it had some advantages because the place was totally quiet. The problem is you keep calling the priests and ask them, are the gates open? Is the place open? Oh yes, come. You come, you knock on the door, nobody opens the door. And that's happened time after time. So we had to come back to the same places multiple times just to find the places open. Anyhow, that will be therefore the beginning of the way of the cross. And I would like to take the opportunity to point at some things which are important. If we try to follow the last 24 hours in the ministry of Jesus in Jerusalem, that will start in what we call the upper room. And that will be someplace around here, right? The cenacle. When they had the Last Supper, the Passover meal, they left town to go to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is down here. That's where Jesus was arrested. They took him up to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. That was someplace around here, the upper city of Jerusalem. That's where the aristocracy used to live. The following morning, they are taking Jesus to Praetorium. The streets are busy. It's Passover. Josephus Flavius tells us that in one Passover, they offered 250,000 lambs. It's a lamb for a family. We speak about millions. The city was not big enough to accommodate everybody. People camped on the mountains around, remember? Once again, this huge theater. So they bring Jesus now to the house of Caiaphas, following morning to Pontius Pilate, someplace around here. Pontius Pilate thinks to himself, well, he's a Galilean. The ruler of Galilee, Antipas, is in town. Maybe I can send him to Antipas and he will deal with the problem. So they take Jesus to the palace of Antipas, someplace around here. Antipas, who was nicknamed the Fox, quite a clever man, says, well, just a minute now. I'm out of my jurisdiction. I cannot deal with anything here. Your problem, Mr. Governor. So they take Jesus back to Pontius Pilate. The trial takes place, and Jesus is walking with the cross to Mount Calvary, and that's what the question arises, where is Mount Calvary? What they call today the way of the cross is a path that is marking a possible path, which is a possibility, but only from the 14th century, not prior to that. The concept that you have to follow one path is relatively new. We have a lot of evidences and testimonies of pilgrims that came to visit Jerusalem. Many of them wrote a journal about their journey to Jerusalem. Nobody mentions the way of the cross. There is a list of places to visit. You can choose which path you're going to follow. If you want to collect indulgences, you're going to go to those places. But there was no mandatory path to follow. This path was born, so to speak, as a result of a deal. After the Crusaders were defeated, and Jerusalem that was in Christian hands for about 100 years is back in Muslim hands, the last thing that the Muslims wanted to see were Christian pilgrims once again roaming the streets of Jerusalem. The tension was so high that it will lead to bloodshed. Nobody wanted to get involved in that. But They needed the money. And the pilgrims brought money with them. It was a very important part of the economy. And therefore, the Muslim authorities were interested to resume the Christian pilgrimages and tourism, basically. But to try to regulate the visit and to try to stop any kind of violence, they simply made a deal. You want to come to the city, fine. You're going to choose one path that you're going to follow. And if we find you out of this path, we are not responsible for your safety because the local Muslims will not tolerate that. And you have to start walking at 3 a.m. And by the time the first Muslim wakes up to go to mosque, you better be out of town. Otherwise, who can stop the riots? So in order to have Christians visiting a Muslim area and try to protect these pilgrims' lives, the idea was, well, you need to choose one path and stay along one path. The way of the cross was born. But that's 1342, not before that. And the people that maintained the place were the Franciscans, a Roman Catholic father's order, which was invited to the Pope Clement VI in 1342, and the Pope gave them a mission. I made the deal with the Sultan. Christians will be able to visit the city. You will be the custodians. You'll be responsible. It gave the Franciscans a lot of power. And they are there ever since. So the way of the cross was a necessity. It was a combination of a political, financial solution. The question is, are we following indeed the footsteps of Jesus? And the answer is, maybe, it's possible. Almost no doubt that the first part of the walk from the fortress down to the central valley will be the one. The question is, now what? Are we going to turn this way, going to turn this way? Let me try to give you some ideas. What is it that we need to do in order to try to point at some location? Number one, looking for a tomb. The tomb of Joseph of Arimathea has to be outside the walls. Now, the walls of the city, not this. This one was built later. Remember? This wall is not there. This is the city wall. This location, that's where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built today, was outside the wall indeed. There was another location outside the wall that was here. That's the Garden Tomb. So you need to look for the tomb outside the walls. You need to know where the walls were. And scholars today do agree about the path of the wall. They have the reasons. Now we need to understand the Roman idea of crucifixion. You want to make that as public as possible, not in a hidden place. And what is more public than by the main roads, the main gates on a small hill and outside the city walls? And if you're looking for that combination of topography, it points at two different locations. This location where the church is at today was the main road that went all the way down to Jaffa. This one over here went all the way to Damascus. So these are two main roads outside the main gates of the city and small hills. So it's either one or the other. Let's make it more complicated. The Bible says that by the cross there was a garden and there was a tomb in the garden. Please define by. What will qualify to be by? You see my point, right? 100 yards? 200 yards? 300 yards? Am I pushing it? What about 600 yards? Is it possible? Because if you're telling me that 600 yards is possible, then this place and this place are not that far away. Is it possible that that was indeed the place of the cross, but that was the tomb? If you say possible, then we don't have to choose one or the other. Maybe the two sides are connected. These are opinions, speculations, because we don't know. As I said, it's up to you to choose. You don't have to prove anything here. We don't speak about science. We speak about faith. We speak about matters of the heart. We speak about traditions, beliefs, etc. I'm just pointing at the two possible locations and even suggested that maybe the two are one. So either one or the other, that will be the path that we call the way of the cross. I do want to go kind of a little and even suggested, all right, that that would be another possible path. And today, indeed, this will be the place for the Garden Tomb. So if this is the one, that should be the way of the cross and not this one. It all depends on the destination. It started in Praetorium, almost no doubt. The question is, where was indeed Mount Calvary? We have stations along the way of the cross. We're not going to name all of them, but these are traditions, obviously. Out of 14 stations, 9 are commemorating biblical events, 5 are traditions. The Bible says nothing about Jesus falling with the cross. Well, there are 3 such stations. The Bible doesn't speak about Veronica, but Mel Gibson did in his movie, The Passion of the Christ. So we speak about a combination of things recorded in the Bible and traditions as well. That's what makes the way of the cross today. And it goes all the way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but we are going, with your permission, to skip that one. We'll be there in just a minute. So we are following the way of the cross, we're making our way into the Jewish quarter, and then we're going to make our way through Zion Gate down to the upper room. Well, let's go then through the street, just to give you a little bit of a taste how the streets of Jerusalem look like in COVID days when the Muslims are calling for prayer. This is the music in Jerusalem all the time. We're not being sarcastic, 5 times a day, right? They call for prayer. And if you stay in a hotel closer to the old city, you don't need a wake-up call. They'll wake you up at 4:30. It's very loud, and sometimes they do that on purpose as a provocation, right? To make the loud as possible. In Muslim countries, they're not allowed to do that. But in Israel, something kind of a political proclamation, right? Yeah, that's me and my friend and partner Nir, arguing passionately about something, not sure about that. Again, COVID days, so some businesses are open, but 0 tourists, 0 customers. That's what they do all day long. They sit there waiting for somebody to come. Always heavy presence of police officers and Israeli soldiers, the border police. Many people feel uncomfortable to see that many people carrying weapons around them. But these people carry weapons for your protection, and they should be a source of security, not a source of concern. You see people dressed in black, which are the ultra-Orthodox. You don't see any tourists, but this will be just to give an idea how the old city of Jerusalem looks like. You go through the bazaars, that could be in Turkey, Damascus, in Egypt. It all looks the same, basically. Well, we're going to go into the Jewish quarter and say a few words about the Jewish quarter. This is the central plaza of the Jewish quarter. So try to listen. Everything is new here. Until about 53 years ago, that was in Jordanian hands, and everything that was not destroyed during the war of 1948 was leveled by the Jordanians right after the war. They wanted to deliver a message. The Jews will never ever live in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. Well, they were wrong. And as we came back in 1967, there was an opportunity, not just to rebuild the Jewish quarter, but also to excavate. And for 5 years, the Jewish quarter was a huge archaeological dig. And even today, under the homes, there is a whole subterranean town. In most cases, goes back to the Roman days. The synagogue in front of you, that was the central synagogue of the Jewish quarter that was leveled by the Jordanians after the war was over. But since we had the blueprint, we had enough pictures and photos, it was rebuilt and dedicated about 10 years ago. So when you go through the Jewish quarter, basically you see the new quarter. You need to understand that during the war of 1948, Jerusalem ended up as a divided city. The old part of town was in Jordanian hands, and much damage was done to the Jewish quarter, but what was still standing was leveled by the Jordanians. The Jewish quarter was in absolute ruins, and they did that, as they said, you don't have to hear me saying that, Jews will never ever live in the old city of Jerusalem. As I said, they were wrong. And coming back in 1967 was an opportunity. Before rebuilding everything, you clear those ruins and you dig. So today, you can go downstairs in every house in the old city of Jerusalem, and you're going to hit other basements connected together, a whole subterranean town. And they keep opening more and more sites. Under the Western Wall Plaza, there's a brand new site. There's a whole other layer underground, which is also part of the Western Wall, but much more ancient. I'm telling you, they're working all the time. It's all underground, and they keep finding stuff. And each time you come to Jerusalem, there's something new to see. So it's not ending, which is really a blessing to see how much more there is to find. So you're going down through Zion Gate, which is over there, and then you leave the city to go and make your way to the upper room. Yeah, I went in, now I'm coming out. Walking out through Zion Gate, on top of Mount Zion. This gate is connecting the Jewish quarter for one side and the area of the upper room on the other side. The term Zion is a little confusing. We need to clarify the term. When the Bible speaks about Mount Zion, it always refers at Mount Moriah.
19 times the Bible mentions the term Mount Zion, and it's always Mount Moriah. When you go to Psalms chapter 48, the Bible says that Mount Zion is on the side of the north of the city of David. Indeed, it is topographically. But in the 5th century, a church was built on top of this hill, and they called it Saint Zion. The name simply shifted. So when today people speak about Mount Zion, and you see the name in maps of Jerusalem, it's not the biblical Mount Zion, which is Mount Moriah, but the western hill of Jerusalem, that Josephus Flavius calls the upper city or the western hill. For the last 1,500 years, this mountain is known by the name of Mount Zion. When you look at the gate behind me, you see a lot of holes. Looks like this area was severely damaged. Indeed, these are bullet marks that reminds us of the heavy fighting that took place in this area in the War of Israel's Independence, 1948-49. This was one of the heaviest battles in the city, and we had failed to liberate the old city of Jerusalem, not even the Jewish quarter. And for that reason, for 19 years, where I'm standing was a buffer zone between two countries. The old city walls were in Jordanian hands, and this part of town was in Israeli hands, and that would be the border between the two parts of the city until the old city was liberated by the Israeli army in June 7th of 1967.
Only a minute of walk, you are hitting the area of the upper room, which is down that way, someplace over there, in the same building, down below the tomb of King David. Impossible that it could be the tomb of King David. The Bible says David was buried in the city of David, which is other part of town, but that's a tradition. And above will be the upper room. And the upper room is known for two major events in the Christian world. Number one, the Last Supper, and 50 days later, Pentecost. The tradition is that the two happen in the same location. The Bible doesn't say that, but the Bible says that 50 days after the Last Supper was taken by Jesus and his disciples were in a place. And that's where the Spirit fell like tongues of fire. It is believed to be in the same location. And this room is divided into two. When they speak about Pentecost Day, it's through that window, another room which is usually closed. And this one is marking the place for the Last Supper. It's from the 13th century. It's a Crusader room. Is the location the same? Well, who knows? But it's possible. It's possible someplace in this area was indeed the place for the upper room and the place for the Last Supper. Well, that brings day number one in Jerusalem to an end, and I hope that you had just a little taste to understand what is it that we're going to do for the next 2 days. So tomorrow is the grand finale. We're going to visit tomorrow the city of David. We're going to see the Pool of Siloam. We'll go up to Temple Mount, which is really an interesting place. We'll see the excavations outside the Western Wall and the Western Wall itself. And you'll be climbing, so to speak, this very same stairs that Joseph and Mary did when they brought baby Jesus for his dedication to the temple. It was excavated, it's there. In 1994, a very important man came to visit Jerusalem. His name was Neil Armstrong, you know the name. And he was guided by the local archaeologists, that was not me. And Neil Armstrong made a statement that very few people can make on our planet. He said, although I walked on the moon, this is much more exciting. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.